Well, Alewife, I mean, the entire area, ecoregion that Cambridge is in is called the Boston Basin ecoregion, and it's over 72% paved surface, so there's very little green environment in this whole region. And Cambridge is one of the second, it's next to Somerville, the second most densely populated city in all of New England. And so the Alewife region is one of very few regions in this area that has green vegetation and semi-natural habitats and called an urban wild. So for that reason, it's really unique and important.
Well, I think it's important to different people for different reasons, but it's a place where there's wildlife. It's a place where people can learn about nature and about wildlife. And it does provide us with some protection from climate impacts as well.
Well, the most dramatic change that the region has recently experienced has been the destruction of this, what's called the Belmont Uplands or the Silver Maple Forest. It was an area of forest that's adjacent to Alewife Reservation and actually added so much value to that reservation by providing really important wildlife habitat and just a different environment with very big trees for a large number of species and for human visitors as well.
Well, there's a private property there that was slated for development, and it had grown trees on it, silver maple trees, over the last many decades that it wasn't being used, and so it became part of the wilderness area. And unfortunately, in the fall, this last year, the developer cut down the trees in preparation for building a housing development.
Well, in my opinion, it's going to affect everything from the physical to the psychological health of the community. I think by not having the carbon sequestration and temperature regulation and flood control properties of this forest, that those ecosystem services will no longer be available to the people who live in the area, so they'll be experiencing more intense weather, more intense flooding, things like that. And I think that psychologically it has an impact because people like green space. There have been several studies recently that show that people's frame of mind, happiness, at the population level, things like crime rates are all related to, and even test scores for students are related to how much green vegetation there is in the region where they live. And so I think that by denying people their God-given right, I think, to have access to nature by removing this, it's going to have, pretty pronounced effects on people's state of mind. This forest could have stood there for years and years and years, and all of a sudden it's gone. I mean, that's what happens in nature. Large disturbances are rare, and things can change really fast. But the other side of the story is things can be built really fast, and we see that with all of these social media organized protests around the country. So once awareness reaches a certain level and the concern reaches a certain trigger point level, we can see massive change. So there's still room for hope because we have the capacity through our connections to each other and through our sharing of information to really move to another level really quickly.
The building has not been built yet. The lawsuit is still ongoing, and so there's still hope that we can prevent construction and ultimately trees can be replanted. Now, will that happen in this particular case? I don't know, but even if it doesn't, we will use this particular issue to.
Hello, this is Barbara, and today I'd like to focus our attention on the root cause of the very unfriendly international situation. And we have to really focus on understanding the importance of gratitude for good things that have been happening, and also to acknowledge participation of God's grace in situations that were impossible to solve through human will, and then God's grace came and miraculously solve them. The most powerful example of God's miraculous grace that we have seen recently was in Thailand, where 12 wonderful boys from a soccer team and their teacher coach were imprisoned in a cave after a very unfortunate flooding of the cave systems. And then the whole world became very focused on asking God to grant them miraculous release, and God answered those prayers, and the whole world was spared a trauma of knowing and witnessing those boys and the teacher being destroyed. So God is working in the universe. Of course, He's running His divine kingdom, and He's working in our lives, and we can plead to Him. He doesn't always answer. In this particular case, He granted the grace. And the attitude of gratitude is very important in such situations, because what happens if someone is ungrateful and then ignores God's presence in such very difficult circumstances, then there is a chance that next time that person asks God for a favor, God will ignore that. In Wikipedia there is a very beautiful definition of gratitude. Gratitude, thankfulness, thanksgiving or gratefulness, from the Latin word gratus, pleasing, thankful, is a feeling of appreciation felt and or similar positive response shown by the recipient of kindness, gifts, help, favors, or other types of generosity towards the giver of such gifts. And I wanted you to look at what is happening today in international relationships. The mood that is dominating today is mood of feeling hurt and blaming others for whatever the circumstances of an individual's life are. And when you look at the whole world, you don't have much talk about creating peace between nations. Most of the talk is about trade relationships, about disarmaments or arming another nation. There are lots of blames for things that happened hundreds of years ago, but there is virtually no talk about need to create peace, vision of peace between nations. We have a new president in the United States, Donald Trump, and he has been trying to create that vision of peace between diverse nations by drawing attention to a sense of fairness in trade, in speech, in relationships, in exchanges. And he tries to create also a good relationship with modern Russia, which is very different from the old Soviet Union, because it doesn't have the unity of all the countries that were part of it. So old Soviet Union was with Ukraine and Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia and Georgia and many other republics. Modern Russia Russian Federation is separate from them. They have their own governments, and Russia has her own government. So there's absolutely nothing wrong in trying to create good relationships with all the former republics that were part of the Soviet Union, and now they have independent governments, and that includes Russia. And the attack on this American president is so vicious, so nasty, that I started actually praying to God about that, because I'd never witnessed in my entire experience in international communications such speech of collective total contempt to the being and life of another country, in this particular case to Russia. It really is an attitude of such total ingratitude for what Russia contributed to after the collapse of the Soviet Union to create international connections and international peace. So we have a situation today that is very different than was facing us in the 80s and 90s. Then there were clearly defined governmental ideologies and different systems running the social life. Russia had very highly developed public sector of trade and industry and education. America at that time had a powerfully developed private sector, and we know about the famous supply side economics that frankly was developed by me in the 80s, because I realized that Americans with all the wealth had no vision of money. They had knowledge about money, voice of money, calculations, but they had no vision of money. Everything was focused on capital and labor. So supply side economics provided the tool to see financial instruments in a vision that eventually created the magnificent electronic and technological industries. Those industries would not have been able to exist on the grounds of only vision of a capital accumulation and labor, because that missing link, the vision of money, was essential to create calculations that would evaluate the investments and securities and all of those wonderful dimensions that we have today. And we've been enjoying this since the 80s, and in some ways people have been taking it for granted. I've never received any gratitude for this at all, as if those things just showed up from a country that had huge inflation and was in deep conflict with the Soviet Union, and then suddenly develops those amazing financial measures and abilities to perceive them and to transfer them and to connect with them internationally and globally. And that really hurt me. It hurt my heart, and it still hurts me. So after dealing with some other situations, I looked at the root cause of that contempt to modern Russia, and then I realized that contempt comes from the perception that financial vision is more important than life. And that was never my intention. My intention was to create circumstances in which people can venture into new ways of measuring wealth, and also to create opportunities for technological and scientific sectors to be powerful and independent on the voting systems. As you know, most of the greatest successes in modern technological wealth come from extremely well organized companies and individual entrepreneurs. So when I started praying to God over this very dangerous situation between America and Russia, I realized that there was a swindle in the way I open up my trust to people that I was certain would create that vision of peace from the wealth created by them having access to the vision of money. And then I realized that those people who did that wanted to take that knowledge only to their own control and to destroy anyone who wanted to participate in it outside of that control. And that is the root of this conflict between America and Russia, because I gave that vision to America, to Americans, hoping and trusting that Americans then would share it with Russia, and it has been happening. But then something bad started being active that not only doesn't want Russia to be part of that international financing system of money as the main platform of exchange of value, but there was an attempt made to destroy it. So my conscience cannot take it. So I think that we have to calm down, enter areas of tranquility, and drop that contempt. Because as easy as it is to open vision to money, it is also very easy to close it. Because that vision of money that I shared with Americans comes from God. It's from divine kingdom, and it has been in my possession from birth, and I was aware of it, and I knew that the main purpose of this was to create wealth that would stabilize the wealth of the nations, that would stabilize the world, and that would bring as much happiness to life as possible. So, as we are dealing today with this world that was contaminated by contempt of other countries and contempt of life itself, I pray to God that God will give strength to President Donald Trump to overcome that contempt and to create good connection between all countries of the world, including Russia. He's already doing it with North Korea, but I believe that their potential is powerful, and that we have an opportunity now to continue that great financial vision without the contempt that entered it. And I know that there is great virtue in our hearts, and that we have come from great heritage of the best that many people brought to America. That we have circumstances now in Europe that favor good relationships with America and that want to enjoy respite from the consequences of World War II. So I encourage you to help me in this situation of such indifference to the destiny of other countries. We have to understand that that situation that brought Cold War to an end was a great miracle from God. It didn't happen overnight. There were many people working for it, praying for it, believing for it. There was great suffering that then American President Ronald Reagan had to go through when he was shot. There was assassination attempt on John Paul II. I went through a horrible, tragic car accident. Many people went through pain and suffering and tremendous sacrifice to bring diverse nations to communication with each other so that we can avoid World War III, so that we can focus our attention on creating value and wonderful things in our lives without the without the condemnation of other nations, without that attitude of contempt to the destiny and culture of other nations. And we have already accomplished a lot. There's a lot of awareness in the world now that those matters are important to God, and that people who trust in divine influence and understand that the world depends on God's grace, that they want to continue that grace and not to fall back to what happened in World War I and World War II. So I think that the miracle that I'm asking God now is to free America from that contempt of Russia and to heal that blindness in the heart towards the source of where division of the new supply side economics money came from. And frankly, it came from Poland, which at that time was connected to Russia. So indirectly, it also comes from Russia. So when people say that Russia had influence on American money, that's what it is. It means that that money didn't show up from a tree. It actually showed up from the knowledge and experience and will of other nations, such as Hungary, Poland, Czechoslovakia, that now it's Czech Republic and Slovakia, Ukraine, Russia, and many others, including even Germany, without which I would not have the power in that vision. So we have to calm down and start focusing on the expression of gratitude for the end of Cold War and to continue the peace by having our hearts filled with divine love, not only to ourselves and to God, but to all others all over the world. And when we do that, God will continue that vision of money. because if people will use that vision of money to create schemes to destroy other nations, God will cut the vision of money. And if he cuts the vision of money, then what benefit will anyone have from that? So I encourage you to express gratitude for the great miracle of modern technology, for the great miracle of modern wealth, and to learn to have love in our hearts and not to allow that contempt to guide politics and decision making. We have a great opportunity today to really transform that bad mood that wants to destroy into the wonderful affection between diverse nations. So I ask God to connect that vision of money, that world's treasure, knowledge, to that condition that it has to promote life. Thank you so much for your attention, and I will talk to you next week during another edition of Happiness in the City. And we are entering now the most amazing months of August. So I wish you wonderful